The fire alarm at the lake house went off at 2014 in the morning, and the only person who heard it was me, lying on a cot in a cardiac ward 40 miles away with 3 stents fresh in my chest. I know that because my son-in-law posted a video of it, the smoke detector chirping, everybody laughing, somebody yelling to just rip the battery out so the party could keep going. That party was the reason none of them came when the hospital called and said I might not last the night. A week later, they drove up to that ward looking for the man who signs the checks, and they found a stripped bed, a folded blanket, and a single index card. When my wife read what I'd written on it, the color drained out of her face like water out of a cracked tub. Let me back up. My name is Russ. I'm 63 years old, and for 38 of those years, I poured concrete. Foundations, mostly, parking structures, bridge footings, the kind of work nobody admires and everybody stands on. I built Tillman Concrete from 1 mixer truck and a second mortgage into the biggest commercial pour outfit in 3 counties. I know what a slab sounds like when it's curing right, and what it sounds like when it's curing right, and what it sounds like when there's a void underneath. I can knock on a wall and tell you if it's hollow. Turns out I could do that with everything in my life except the people sleeping under my own roof. It was a Friday in early November when my heart quit on me. I was out in the shop behind the house, the unheated metal building where I keep my tools, and an old Chris Craft boat I'd been sanding down for 2 summers. My wife called it my hiding place. She wasn't wrong. The shop smelled like varnish and cold steel, and the cherry pipe tobacco I wasn't supposed to be smoking anymore. And to me, that's the smell of being left alone, which by then was the only thing I wanted in the world. I was reaching up to clamp a board when it hit me. People say it's like an elephant on your chest. It wasn't. It was like somebody reached in through my ribs and grabbed my heart in a fist and started to squeeze, slow, deliberate, like they had all the time in the world, and I had none. The clamp fell out of my hand. I heard it hit the floor far away, like it dropped in another room. My left arm went heavy and dumb. Sweat came up cold all over me at once, soaking through my flannel before I even understood I was sweating. I'd watched my own father go this way at 59, so I knew. I got my phone out of my chest pocket with fingers that didn't feel like mine, and I called 911 first. Gave them the address, told the woman my heart was going. She said stay on the line. I didn't. I needed to hear somebody who loved me, or who I thought loved me, which I'm learning is not the same thing. I called my wife. 41 years married. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I told myself she was in the shower. She was driving. She didn't have the ringer on. I called my son. He picked up on the 4th ring, and the first thing I heard was a country band and 100 people hollering. Dad, hey, can it wait? We're about to do the toast. It was my grandson's engagement party. Out at the lake house. My lake house. The one I deeded to my son 2 years back because his accountant said it was smart for the taxes. I'd paid for the band. I'd paid for the catered barbecue and the open bar and the tent. $11,000. I'd seen the invoice. I'd been invited, technically, but my wife told me 3 days before that it would be easier if I didn't come, because my chest pains made everybody nervous, and this was supposed to be a happy night. Son, I said. I had to push the word out past the fist in my chest. I'm in the shop. I think it's my heart. I think it's a bad one. There was a pause. The band kept playing. And then my son did the thing I will hear in my head until I die. He laughed. Not a cruel laugh. That's the part that wrecked me. It was an annoyed, tired laugh. The laugh you give a kid who says his stomach hurts on a school morning. Dad, come on. You said that at Easter and it was acid reflux. Take one of your aspirins and lie down. We'll swing by tomorrow, okay? I gotta go. Your grandson's about to make his speech. I can't breathe, I said. Call your mother. Tell her. Dad, she's right here and she's fine. Everybody's fine. You just need to relax. You always do this. You always have to be the center of everything. His voice dropped low, the way you talk when you don't want people around you to hear. Don't do this tonight. Not tonight. And then fainter, away from the phone, I heard my wife's voice. I heard it clear as a bell across 40 miles. Is that your father? Tell him I said happy birthday in advance and we'll call him tomorrow. God, the man cannot stand to be left out. It wasn't my birthday for 2 more months. The line went dead. He hung up on me. I sat down on the cold concrete with my back against the boat I'd never finish, and I waited to die alone in a metal building while my family toasted with champagne I'd paid for. The ambulance came. I remember the gravel under the gurney wheels and a young paramedic named Sosa. I'll never forget him, telling me to squeeze his hand and stay with him, calling me sir, calling me partner, treating a stranger with more care in 9 minutes than my own blood had shown me in 9 years. At the hospital, they ran me straight back. Widowmaker, I heard somebody say. The left main artery, 90-something% blocked. They put me under. When I came up out of the dark, there was a nurse beside my bed. An older black gentleman with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a voice like a cello. His badge said his name. We'll call him what I called him, which by the end was just my friend. He'd been the one to make the calls. Mr. Bellior, Tillman, he said. You with me? I was. He told me the surgeon had done good work. He told me I was lucky, which I didn't feel. And then carefully, the way you set down something breakable, he told me he'd called every number on my emergency contact sheet. My wife, my son. He told them their husband and father was in surgery and might not survive it. He told me what they'd said. My wife had said, and he had the time logged because he charts everything, that she couldn't possibly drive at night with her vision, and she'd come first thing. My son had said to call him only if it was actually final, because he had a house full of guests. And then the next morning when my friend called again to say I'd pulled through, my wife had asked one question before she asked how I was. She asked whether the surgery would affect the timing on the lake house transfer. I lay there and I looked at the ceiling tiles. There were 1,140 little holes in the one above me. I counted them twice, and somewhere in the counting, the man who'd had a heart attack died, and a different man took his place in that bed. I didn't cry. I want you to understand that. I'd done all my crying years before, quietly in that shop, and I just hadn't known what I was crying about until now. The grief was already spent. What I had left was clear and cold and useful, like a well-poured footing. I asked my friend if he'd do me a favor. I asked him to keep telling my family I was sedated, critical, not allowed visitors. Buy me a week. He looked at me a long moment over those reading glasses. I think he'd seen a lot of families in that ward. I think he knew exactly what I was asking and why. You rest, Mr. Tillman, is all he said. I'll handle the phone. A week. I needed a week? Because here's the thing about pouring concrete for 38 years. You learn that everything looks permanent right up until you find the rebar has been left out. My family thought my money was a foundation under their feet. It was a tent, and I knew where every stake was driven because I'd driven them. The first call I made from that bed was to the attorney who'd handled my company for 20 years. Not my wife's friendly estate lawyer, the one who drafted all those documents that somehow always favored the kids. My guy, the pit bull. I told him what had happened in plain language, and there was a silence on the line. And then he said, Russ, I'm going to come to you. Don't sign anything anyone brings you. Don't talk to anyone in your family about money. Can you do that? I could. He came that afternoon with a paralegal and a leather folder. Over the next 4 days, sitting up in that bed in a paper gown with an IV in my arm, I took my life apart stake by stake, and I did it all legal, all clean, all mine to do. The lake house deeded to my son had a clause his clever accountant missed, a life estate that gave me the right to force a sale, and I forced it. the company that paid all their salaries. My son was VP of operations. My daughter-in-law ran a consulting arrangement that consisted of cashing checks. My grandson had a no-show job. All of it ran through a structure I controlled. I dissolved the family draw. I revoked the credit cards that hung off my accounts, the ones my wife used like they grew the money themselves. I moved the liquid assets, every dollar, into a new trust with a new name and a single trustee who was not anyone with my last name. And I changed my will. The old one split everything 3 ways. The new one left it all to 2 places. A scholarship fund for the kids of concrete workers and laborers, the men who break their bodies on job sites like the ones that built my fortune, and a cardiac unit. That cardiac unit, the one that put me back together when my own people couldn't be bothered to drive 40 miles. On the 4th night, when it was all signed and witnessed and filed, my attorney shook my hand and said it was the most thorough job he'd ever done in 1 week. I thanked him. Then I asked my friend the nurse for a piece of paper. He brought me an index card from the supply closet. I wrote 3 sentences on it. I didn't write them in anger. My hand was steady. I'd built 1,000 things in my life, and that little card was the cleanest, truest thing I ever made. The next morning, before the sun was up, I checked myself out against medical advice, which a man is allowed to do. My friend wheeled me down to the loading dock himself, where a car was waiting that I'd arranged. He didn't ask where I was going. I told him anyway, because by then he'd earned it, and because somebody on this earth ought to know I was alive. I shook his hand and I put something in it, a folded check from the new account, and I told him to retire whenever he felt like it. He looked at it, and then he looked at me, and his eyes were wet, and he said, "You take care of that heart now. It's a good one." I believed him for the first time in a long time. I set up in a rented cabin up in the high country, a place with 1 road in and a view of mountains that didn't owe me anything. My attorney had a man monitor things and report back because I wanted to know. I'm not going to pretend I didn't want to know. It took 6 days for the foundation to fail under them, and I had a front row seat by phone. It started small, the way it always does. My wife's card got declined at the salon. Embarrassing, but she figured it was a glitch, called the bank, and the bank told her the account had been closed by the primary holder. She laughed it off. "He's confused," she told them. "He just had heart surgery. I'll straighten it out." Then the catering company called my son about the $11,000 balance for the engagement party, because the deposit check had bounced. Then the lease company called about the 2 trucks. Then a man in a tie knocked on the door of the lake house and introduced himself as representing the new owner, because the forced sale had closed. An all-cash buyer my trust had lined up, and explained they had 30 days to vacate. That's when they finally drove up to the hospital, not to see me, to find the man with the pen. My son told the front desk he was there for his father in cardiac recovery, and the woman looked it up and told him there was no patient by that name. He raised his voice. He demanded they sent my friend out, and my friend, bless him, told them with great gentleness that Mr. Tillman had been discharged. Where? My wife wanted to know. To whom? My friend said he wasn't at liberty. My son said he wasn't at liberty. My son said he was the man's son and he had a right. And my friend, who had charted every call they never made, looked at him and said, "Sir, I called you 4 times the night your father almost died." And he handed my wife the index card, because I'd left it with him for exactly this. I wasn't there. But the man who reports to my attorney was in the parking lot, and he saw my wife come out and sit down on the curb in her good coat and not get up for a long time. The card said 3 things. You chose the party. I chose myself. Don't call the bank, don't call the lawyer, and don't call me. There's nothing left in any of them for you. They fought it, of course. People like that always fight. My son hired a lawyer, the friendliest state one, and they filed to have me declared incompetent. That was their whole play, diminished capacity. A confused old man traumatized by surgery, manipulated by a scheming nurse and a predatory attorney into giving away his family's birthright. They actually wrote that. They put it in a filing. They told a judge that the man who built Tillman Concrete couldn't be trusted to know his own mind. I'll be honest with you. When my attorney read me that filing over the phone, I laughed for the first time since the shop. Because they'd made a mistake men like me wait our whole lives for. They'd taken a quiet, private matter and dragged it into a courtroom, into the public record, in front of a judge, under oath. They wanted to put my mind on trial. Fine. I'd been building the case against them since the night I counted those ceiling tiles, and they'd just agreed to sit in the room while I laid it out. The hearing was on a Tuesday. I wore a gray suit, and I drove myself. 4 hours with my new stents humming along just fine. They didn't know I'd be there. They'd been told I was too frail to appear. I sat in the back of that paneled courtroom under a hat and watched them file in. And I want to tell you, they looked good. My son in a sober navy suit, the picture of a grieving, responsible heir. My daughter-in-law in black like a widow. My wife small and trembling and dabbing her eyes. 41 years. She'd never once trembled like that when it mattered. Their lawyer stood up and painted his picture. The confused patient. The vulnerable senior. The undue influence. He held up financial records and called my decisions erratic. He said I'd given my fortune to strangers, to a hospital, to charity, when any sound mind would provide for his own family. He said it like it was the most damning thing in the world, that I'd helped strangers instead of them. And I watched the judge's face, and I knew the judge had heard 1,000 of these and was bored, and I knew that was about to change. When it was my attorney's turn, he didn't argue. He just asked the court for permission to play 3 things. The first was the 911 recording, my own voice, wet and failing, giving my address, saying my heart was going. The second was the hospital's logged calls, time-stamped, the nurse's careful documentation read into the record by the nurse himself, who'd flown in on my dime and sat in the front row in his good suit. 4 calls. Their 4 refusals. My wife's voice asking about the lake house timing, before she asked if her husband had lived. And the third was the video. The one my son-in-law had posted himself, public, to 100 followers, and never thought to take down. The fire alarm chirping, the laughing, somebody yelling rip the battery out. Timestamp 2014 AM. 2 hours after my chest was cracked open 40 miles away. The courtroom was very quiet when it finished playing. Then my attorney called me to the stand. I stood up in the back and took off my hat, and I watched my son turn around and go white, and I walked up that center aisle past my family. Slow, steady, no cane, no trimmer. And I sat down and I told the judge my name and my date of birth and the name of every concrete job I poured in the last 10 years, in order with the addresses. I recited the tax structure of my own company from memory. I explained the life estate clause and why my son's accountant should have caught it. The judge stopped me after about 4 minutes and said he'd heard enough, that he had rarely encountered a more competent witness, and he dismissed the petition with what he called regret that it was ever filed. And then he did something he didn't have to do. He looked at my family over his glasses and he said that while their financial claims had no standing, he hoped they understood that the court could restore money, but not the other thing. And he let the silence sit there. My son tried to catch me in the hallway after. He had his hand out, and his eyes were doing something I'd never seen them do. "Dad," he said. "Dad, that night, I didn't understand how serious, please." I looked at my son for a long time. I built that boy a treehouse when he was 7. It's still standing. I poured the footings myself. I taught him to drive in a church parking lot. I cried at his wedding, and I found, standing in that hallway, that when I went looking for the feeling that should have been there, the place where it used to be was just smooth and cured and empty, like a slab poured over a hole. "I heard you laugh," I told him. That was all. Then I put my hat back on, and I walked out into the daylight, and I did not look back to see if he followed, because it didn't matter anymore whether he did. I live now in a small place near the water, in a country where I had to learn to count the money out loud at the market until the woman who runs it started doing it for me. Patient, kind, treating a strange old man like he was worth the trouble. There's a kid down the road, maybe 10, who found out I can fix anything with an engine. And he brings me broken things, a scooter, a fan, a radio his grandmother loves. We don't share a language. We don't need one. He hands me the broken thing, and I fix it, and he grins this gap-toothed grin and runs off shouting, and something in my chest that the surgeons couldn't reach gets a little better every time. My phone rang last week. It was my wife's number, 41 years, and I looked at her name on that screen and I waited to feel the old pull. The guilt, the duty, the fist around the heart. I felt none of it. I felt the way you feel about weather in a city you used to live in. I didn't answer it, and I didn't decline it. I set the phone face down on the table next to my coffee, and I let it ring itself out. And then I went back to watching the light come up over the water, and the kid came down the road with a busted flashlight, and I had work to do. People will tell you blood is thicker than water. They poured that into me my whole life. But I spent 38 years learning what holds and what doesn't. And I'll tell you the truth, I had to almost die to learn. Blood is just blood. It's the people who drive 40 miles in the dark for you. The stranger who squeezes your hand and calls you partner. The kid with the gap-toothed grin. The woman who counts your change so you don't feel ashamed. That's the only family the word was ever supposed to mean. I'm an old man who poured his whole life into a foundation for people who were standing somewhere else. And I'm here to tell you, it is never, not at 63, not at 90, too late to walk off the job site, pour something new, and finally stand on it yourself. The fist that grabbed my heart in that cold shop taught me something no job site ever did. For 38 years, I believed that if I poured enough, paid enough, gave enough, the people standing on top of it would hold steady when the ground shook. I had it backwards. A foundation doesn't earn loyalty. It only reveals what was always built on top of it. My son laughed because he'd been taught his whole life that I would catch him no matter what, and I had taught him that. My wife asked about the lake house before she asked if I'd lived because, somewhere over 41 years, I let her believe the money was the marriage. None of that fell out of the sky. I poured it, one quiet check at a time, telling myself that providing was the same thing as loving. It isn't. That's the first hard truth I had to swallow on a cot under 1140 ceiling tiles. Here's what I want you to take from a stubborn old man who almost died alone with a wrench in his hand. The way you treat the people who can't do anything for you in that moment is who you actually are, and the way they treat you when you can't sign a check is who they actually are. I learned to stop confusing comfort with character, in them and in myself. The clearest thing I ever did wasn't the trust or the will or the courtroom. It was finally seeing the wall for what it was, instead of what I wished it to be. And trusting my own eyes even when they showed me something that broke my heart. A second time, but seeing it isn't enough, or I'd have walked out years sooner. It took everything I had to actually pick up the phone, call the right lawyer, sit up in that bed with an IV in my arm, and take my own life apart stake by stake when every soft part of me wanted to forgive and write one more check and pretend. Doing the hard, correct thing when you're frightened and grieving and outnumbered, that's a muscle. I built mine late. You can start building yours today before some Friday in November forces your hand. So be the kind of person who drive 40 miles in the dark for somebody. Be Sosa, squeezing a stranger's hand and calling him partner. Be the nurse who charts every call and tells the truth out loud in a courtroom. Build something real underneath the people you love, not just a balance they can draw on. And if you wake up one day and knock on your own walls and hear nothing but hollow, don't tell yourself you imagined it. Trust the sound. Find the courage. Pour something new. I did it at 63 with 3 stents in my chest, and I am sitting by the water right now fixing a kid's broken flashlight, more at peace than I have been in my whole long, well-funded life. It is never too late to stand on ground that can actually hold you.